Okay. Well, hello, welcome to CAPE Clinician Speaker Series, where we delve into the lives of real CAPE clinicians and their lives within science. My name is Jennifer Beck, and I'll be the facilitator for this episode today. So I'm a junior at Northwestern, and I study global health and anthropology, and I'm one of the co-presidents for CAPE Clinicians. And I'm very excited to have Professor Miri with me today. Good afternoon, Professor Miri.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with me for our speaker series. So as you and our listeners may know, CAPE Clinicians is a startup scientific publication from the garage at Northwestern, and we focus on making scientific research more accessible and understandable for students from a variety of ages and backgrounds. So we're so excited to have you and to learn more about your work within neuroscience and neurobiology, and any advice you may have for budding scientists to come. So I'll just go straight into the questions. Could you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself in terms of educational background and your time at Northwestern?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been at Northwestern as an assistant professor, running a lab in the neurobiology department for about 5 years. And in my lab studies the neural basis of movement, basically how the nervous system gives rise to the movements that we perform. And before that, I can sort of work backwards and, we can piece together the timeline. But before that, I did my postdoctoral research at Columbia University in New York. I was there for about 6 years, doing work that's very similar to what I do now, and sort of laid the foundation for the sort of work that we do in my lab. And then before that, I did my PhD at Princeton University. There I was doing something not entirely different from what I do now. We were studying movements, but different source, and in a different model organism. I work on mice now. We do all our experiments in mice, but as a graduate student, I actually worked on larval zebrafish, which are these tiny 4 or 5 millimeter long larval fish that are an excellent model organism because they're see-through, and they're externally fertilized. So they've been a great model organism for studying development and nervous system development. And for my PhD research, I actually studied the oculomotor system, the part of the nervous system that controls eye movements. And we studied a particular neural circuit within the oculomotor system. And that system is fully functioning actually in larval fish, these fish that are just like, about 5 or 7 days post-fertilization. So that was a good model for studying that system. And then let's see, now we're getting back there. Before that, I actually traveled for a year. I knew I was going to go to graduate school, so I traveled for some time, and did sort of, nothing research related. My first job before or after college was actually as a high school teacher. So I was a high school math teacher. I taught 8th and 10th grade at a charter school in Boston, which was a lot of fun. And before that, I got undergraduate degrees in neuroscience and mathematics at Brown University, and did some neuroscience research there, which was sort of how I got interested in research originally.
Oh, nice. Thank you so much for sharing. So I just want to follow up on that last point you made. How did you increase your interest or find a passion for neuroscience and research? And what made you want to pursue it professionally and have your own lab here at Northwestern?
Yeah, so I definitely got interested in it as an undergrad when I started doing it. I didn't grow up dreaming about being a scientist. I thought science was interesting in school. I think I probably liked it, more than history and English and some of the other subjects. But I wasn't, I didn't grow up with this strong passion for doing science. When I showed up at undergrad, I think I thought I would eventually go to medical school. I think my goal at that point was to like become a psychiatrist or something of that sort. I really had no idea what scientific research was like at that age, though. I really hadn't been exposed to it outside of what you learn in science class in school. Um, but because I was thinking about medical school, one of the things that they kind of encourage you to do is to get interested in research or get involved in research. And I had a first experience the summer after my freshman year. And well, to be fair, actually, I did a couple years prior to that. I was part of a summer program where we did like some psychology research that I thought was like pretty interesting. But that was still, sort of kind of I was operating as a student at that point and not really doing real research. But yeah, I participated in a summer program where we worked in labs. This was at Rutgers University. We worked in labs for 8 or 10 weeks during the summer, and that was my first experience doing electrical recordings from neurons and learning about and measuring the currents that pass through membranes in neurons. And it seemed, pretty fun. I'd never done anything like it, and it was definitely the most interesting thing I'd ever done. And I just sort of, stuck with it. When I got back to college, I joined a lab and started doing research like during the school year. I actually took a half a year off from college, and I wanted to sort of travel abroad, but there weren't great abroad programs to study neuroscience at that point. And so I just decided, well, I'll just take a semester off. I kind of had enough classes in the bank to do that and still graduate on time. And I worked in a lab full time actually in Italy for 6 months, and that was sort of an even better introduction to what it's like to do science. And around that time, I'd had good experiences doing science, and I knew it was fun and interesting. And I was still kind of weighing like, well, am I going to go to medical school? Am I going to try to go into scientific research? Am I going to try and do both? And I definitely felt myself sort of gravitating more towards pursuing research. And I sort of ended up on that path. I wasn't like completely sure when I was graduating college that I wanted to go and pursue a PhD. So I gave myself the chance to think about it. And like I said, I worked as a high school teacher for a while. I was really interested in education as well. So sort of over a long period, I think I eventually decided that, science in a research capacity was what I wanted to pursue. But it's not, it's not an easy decision. In some sense, it's like an impossible decision because, you don't really know what the future is going to hold. You make these kinds of decisions with very limited information. But ultimately, I think I knew I liked the process of doing science, like the sort of day in, day out, like, the things the activities that you do as a scientist. I knew I liked doing those. And so I knew the like sort of daily experience of doing science was, relatively, fun. And you have all these other like ideas and interests, like this sounds cool, I'm passionate about this, I'm interested in that. But ultimately, when you have a job, your job is like what you do on a daily basis. And so, regardless about how you feel about it on like a cosmic level, you want to enjoy the practice of doing it. And so science was the thing that I think I enjoyed the practice of the most. And I don't I think that was ultimately I think I sort of got lucky But deciding based on that criteria. But yeah, I think that is a good way to make the decision. Focusing on the actual experience of doing it.
Mm. Yeah, I think like personally for me, I'm sure a lot of listeners can resonate with it. Like a lot of people start out with like a pre-medical aspiration, um, but like as they like form new experiences, it seems like you've definitely had a lot of diverse experiences. It can definitely help form that decision, which I think is really amazing.
Yeah, you want I mean, we have such a limited perspective on, the careers, the kinds of things you can do for a living, when we're young. And everybody's heard about medicine.
Mhm.
Everybody knows what a doctor is. And you can sort of like, think about that in a very concrete way. But then, you go to college and you get exposed to more, and sort of new possibilities open up, right? And I think it's helpful to at least like consider those possibilities, um and yeah, just be open to the different paths that you learn about, as you get older.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we've just been talking about like your prior experiences and your educational background, but now I just want to like move into your current work. But before we like move into the very technical details of what you do at your lab, do you think you can describe like what neuroscience and neurobiology is, like maybe to a younger person that's interested in science?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly try, right? I mean, we're probably all familiar with the fact that we have this nervous system, this brain, and this spinal cord, and these nerves throughout our body. And it turns out that these are the fundamental driver of our behavior, right? Our ability to think, and decide, and to move. Um, that's all thanks to the nervous system. And so we know that the nervous system is this like important driver of our behavior, but we really have only the beginnings of ideas about how it does that, how it makes all of our behavior happen. So we really try to understand the nervous system, in the way that one might try to understand any machine that does something, to understand how what goes into it, and how that results in things coming out of it. And yeah, so it's this process of trying to understand what's going on inside the brain to give rise to our behavior.
Hmm, it's amazing. I think I understand it a little bit more now. And yeah, I know you mentioned a little bit about your research at your lab, how it relates to like movement and how you're understanding that through a neural perspective. But do you think you can expand on that? And yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. It turns out that, movement, while it's a pretty basic thing, we have these muscles, and, we activate them in different patterns, and it causes parts of our body to move. We know that what's going on inside the brain and the spinal cord is probably pretty complicated. And one of the basic things to understand is that there's like so many cells in the brain and the spinal cord, and so many cells that are involved in driving movements in particular. Like there's like billions of them, right? And they're all doing things like every second of every day. And so there's a lot that's going on. And we can think of movement really as the consequence, or the effect of the action of all these billions of cells working together, right? They kind of all have a common goal, and they're trying to make the body move, and so they have to work together to make that happen. Much in the way like an orchestra of musicians works together in a coordinated fashion to play a piece of music. right? And ultimately, we really want to understand how that works, how all those billions of cells work together, ultimately to make our muscles, activate in these, pretty sophisticated patterns. And it turns out, that's a pretty hard thing to do. And so we're really just at the beginning of that process of understanding how the neurons work together.
Hmm. Yeah, really interesting. Very cool. Yeah, we can move on to the next question. So, since CAPE Clinicians focuses on accessibility within scientific research and education, do you have any advice for anyone interested in getting involved within academia, especially within the STEM field?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I could probably give, a number of pieces of advice. I think it's important to be persistent. If you're interested in science and careers in science, it can be hard to find good opportunities to get started with science. And I mean, there are opportunities for undergraduate students, even high school students, to get involved. But they're not always easy to identify. um, and so it might take some time to actually identify a laboratory opportunity where you can get started. Um, but then the persistence, I think, you need to sort of that you need persistence sort of all along, right? Because your experience of science really changes over time. Science is you get better at it on very long time scales. I'm still getting better at science, really, and I've been doing it for 20 years almost. And it's hard at first. And a lot of things that we try, for a while, whether it's a few weeks or a few months when we're young, when they're hard and maybe not super satisfying, we decide like this is not for me. And But I think if science interests you, it's good to be open to the fact that your first experience might not be really exciting. Maybe you want to try to have a different experience. And also recognize that like as you learn more about what you're doing and you build skills to actually do science, it gets more interesting and more rewarding. So what seems kind of rote or formulaic when you're starting out can become extremely creative and interesting if you give it time. But it's hard. I mean,
Mhm.
ultimately we have to make decisions about what to involve ourselves in, over a period of months and years when we're young. And I think nobody gets into science really with full knowledge of what it's like to do science. But it definitely does get more interesting the longer you do it. Um, yeah.
Hmm.
So that would be the first piece of advice. I think the other thing to maybe appreciate is that you know um, if you want to learn about science and what it's like to be a scientist, if that's like something you're considering, um, you should try and reach out to scientists, professors. I mean, if you're at college, you can you always have the opportunity to try and talk to one of your professors, even if you don't take a class of theirs or don't directly work with them. But folks like me are always willing to talk to a curious young person about what our career is like, and what it's like to do science. So if you feel like you'd like to learn more, you can always take the proactive step of reaching out to someone like me, and trying to ask some questions, because that's really the best way to start to get a sense of what it's like, I think.
Yeah, I think that was really great advice. I feel like if you don't have any prior experience, making that first like connection or step is can be really daunting without it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, science really is like, um, it's something you have to try it's something you have to do in order to understand it.
Mhm.
Doing like actual science research like we do, it's actually, it turns out it bears little resemblance to the science classes that you take in school, and even the laboratory classes that you have, the science labs. In science labs, you're usually doing a prefabricated experiment where you know what the result is going to be, or at least your teacher knows what the result is going to be. But actual science is very different. We do experiments where we don't know what the result is going to be, or maybe we have a question we want to ask, but we don't even know what experiment to do, and so we have to design the experiment itself. Um, and so there's lots of ways in which we're creative as scientists that you don't really get the opportunity to experience in classes growing up. So I would I would just encourage people, like, if they're interested, to try and have an experience doing research, because that's really, the best way to get a feel for what it's like.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. All right, we're already on our last question. We just want to end on a fun note. But do you have a favorite neurobiology fact or like tidbit of information you picked up that really stuck with you?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many of them. um, one of the really strange things is that, everything, all of our experience and stuff is actually going on in our head, right? When we feel pain, it really feels like that pain is localized to a certain part of our body, right? But that sensation of pain is actually the result of a process that's going on not just in our body part, but also in our brain, right? And that, I mean, that sort of has tripped me out since like the beginning of it, trying to sort of wrap your head around the fact that we, like, there are all these things happening in the world, that are actually happening in our head, and that's how we experience them. And it's not, yeah, we don't really have a way of even totally making sense of that, how the brain is involved in that experience. But yeah, it's always really fascinated me.
Yeah, really interesting and seems like a really like big field. You can explore all those questions. Yeah.
So many questions, too many questions. I mean, they're not going to put us out of business anytime soon. um I mean, maybe we totally understand how the liver works or how the heart works. I mean, I'm sure that's not entirely true, but we've got a pretty well developed sense of how those organs work.
Hmm.
But the brain, we really are just at the very beginning.
Mm.
And yeah, so there's sort of an endless list of interesting questions.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Professor Miri, for speaking with me today. Cape Clinicians really appreciates your insight into academia and everything neuroscience. Yeah, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. You take care.
Thank you.